It proved a simple business. From the loads we selected such articles as were essential, ammunition for the most part to carry ourselves, and the rest we abandoned, hiding it under a pile of stones in case we should ever come that way again. The guns they had thrown aside we distributed among the Zulus who had none, though the thought that they possessed them, so far as I was concerned, added another terror to life. The prospect of going into battle with those wild axemen letting off bullets in every direction was not pleasant, but fortunately when that crisis came, they cast them away and reverted to the weapons to which they were accustomed. Now all this sounds much like a tale of disaster, or at any rate of failure. It is however wonderful by what strange ways good results are brought about, so much so that at times I think that these seeming accidents must be arranged by an intelligence superior to our own, to fulfil through us purposes of which we know nothing, and frequently, be it admitted, of a nature sufficiently obscure. Of course this is a fatalistic doctrine, but then as I have said before, within certain limits I am a fatalist. To take the present case, for instance, the whole Inez episode at first sight might appear to be an excrescence on my narrative, of which the object is to describe how I met a certain very wonderful woman and what I heard and experienced in her company. Yet it is not really so, since had it not been for the Inez adventure, it is quite clear that I should never have reached the home of this woman, if woman she were, or have seen her at all. Before long this became very obvious to me, as shall be told. From the night upon which Hans and I failed to rescue Inez, we had no more difficulty in following the trail of the cannibals, who thenceforward were never more than a few hours ahead of us and had no time to be careful or to attempt to hide their spoor. Yet so fast did they travel that do what we would, burdened and wearied as we were, it proved impossible to overtake them. For the first 3 days the track ran on through a scattered rolling bush veld of the character that I have described, but tending continually downhill. When we broke camp on the morning of the 4th day, eating a hasty meal at dawn, for now game had become astonishingly plentiful, so that we did not lack food, the rising sun showed beneath us an endless sea of billowy mist stretching in every direction, far as the sight could carry. To the north, however, it did come to an end, for there, as I judged 50 or 60 miles away, rose the grim outline of what looked like a huge fortress, which I knew must be one of those extraordinary mountain formations, probably owing their origin to volcanic action, that are to be met with here and there in the vast expanses of Central and Eastern Africa. Being so distant, it was impossible to estimate its size, which I guessed must be enormous, but in looking at it I bethought me of that great mountain in which Zikali said the marvellous White Queen lived, and wondered whether it could be the same, as from my memory of his map upon the ashes it well might be. That is, if such a place existed at all. If so, the map had shown it as surrounded by swamps and, well, surely that mist hid the face of a mighty swamp? It did indeed, since before nightfall, following the spoor of those Amahagger, we had plunged into a morass so vast that in all my experience I have never seen or heard of its like. It was a veritable ocean of papyrus and other reeds, some of them a dozen or more feet high, so that it was impossible to see a yard in any direction. Here it was that the Amahagger ahead of us proved our salvation, since without them to guide us we must soon have perished. For through that gigantic swamp there ran a road, as I think an ancient road, since in 1 or 2 places I saw stonework which must have been laid by man. Yet it was not a road which it would have been possible to follow without a guide, seeing that it also was overgrown with reeds. Indeed, the only difference between it and the surrounding swamp was that on the road the soil was comparatively firm, that is to say, one seldom sank into it above the knee, whereas on either side of it quagmires were often apparently bottomless and, what is more, partook of the nature of quicksand. This we found out soon after we entered the swamp, since Robertson, pushing forward with a fierce eagerness which seemed to consume him, neglected to keep his eye upon the spoor and stepped off the edge on to the land that appeared to be exactly similar to its surface. Instantly he began to sink in greasy and tenacious mud. Umslopogaas and I were only 20 yards behind, yet by the time we reached him in answer to his shouts already he was engulfed up to his middle, and going down so rapidly that in another minute he would have vanished altogether. Well, we got him out, but not with ease, for that mud clung to him like the tentacles of an octopus. After this we were more careful. Nor did this road run straight. On the contrary, it curved about and sometimes turned at right angles, doubtless to avoid a piece of swamp over which it had proved impossible for the ancients to construct a causeway, or to follow some outcrop of harder soil beneath. The difficulties of that horrible place are beyond description, and indeed can scarcely be imagined. First there was that of a kind of grass which grew among the roots of the reeds and had edges like those of knives. As Robertson and I wore gaiters, we did not suffer so much from it, but the poor Zulus with their bare legs were terribly cut about and in some cases lame. Then there were the mosquitoes which lived here by the million and all seemed anxious for a bite. Also snakes of a peculiarly deadly kind were numerous. A Zulu was bitten by one of them of so poisonous a nature that he died within 3 minutes, for the venom seemed to go straight to his heart. We threw his body into the swamp, where it vanished at once. Lastly there was the all-pervading stench and the intolerable heat of the place, since no breath of air could penetrate that forest of reeds, while a minor trouble was that of the multitude of leeches which fastened to our bodies. By looking one could see the creatures sitting on the under side of leaves with their heads stretched out, waiting to attack anything that went by. As wayfarers there could not have been numerous, I wondered what they had lived on for the last few thousand years. By the way, I found that paraffin, of which we had a small supply for our hand lamps, rubbed over all exposed surfaces, was to some extent a protection against these blood-sucking worms and the gnats, although it did make one go about smelling like a dirty oil tin. During the day, except for the occasional rush of some great iguana or other reptile, and the sound of the wings of the flocks of wild fowl passing over us from time to time, the march was deathly silent. But at night it was different, for then the bullfrogs boomed incessantly, as did the bitterns, while great swamp owls and other night-flying birds uttered their weird cries. Also there were mysterious sucking noises caused, no doubt, by the sinking of areas of swamp, with those of bursting bubbles of foul uprushing gas. Strange lights, too, played about the will-o'-the-wisps or St. Elmo's fires, as I believe they are called, that frightened the Zulus very much, since they believed them to be spirits of the dead. Perhaps this superstition had something to do with their native legend that mankind was torn out of the reeds. If so, they may have imagined that the ghosts of men went back to the reeds, of which there were enough here to accommodate those of the entire Zulu nation. Anyway, they were much scared. Even the bold witch doctor Goroko was scared and went through incantations with a little bag of medicines he carried to secure protection for himself and his companions. Indeed, I think even the iron Umslopogaas himself was not as comfortable as he might have been, although he did inform me that he had come out to fight and did not care whether it were with man or wizard or spirit. In short, of all the journeys that I have made, with the exception of the passage of the desert on our way to King Solomon's mines, I think that through this enormous swamp was the most miserable. Heartily did I curse myself for ever having undertaken such a quest in a wild attempt to allay that sickness, or rather to quench that thirst of the soul which, I imagine, at times assails most of those who have hearts and think or dream. For this